Today I'm going to show you guys a few tips that can help you out if you're coming up with your own melodies. When you start working on your melodies, you might take the approach of writing the entire melody out, getting it to the point where you like it, but by the time you finish the beat, that melody that you worked so hard on to get to sound so good doesn't sound all that great in the final product. There are a couple of concepts that you need to understand when you run into this problem. In my opinion, something that you want to do earlier on in the beat making process is choose which instrument or synth you want to use. The reason why is because which instrument you use is going to have an impact on what you should be doing with your melody. Choosing a sound like this is going to end up in a completely different sounding beat in the end compared to choosing a sound like this. The reason being is this sound right here is just far more dense and it's going to end up taking a lot more room up in the beat. The first sound that we chose is just far more plucky and doesn't last as long. It's not as sustained. Whereas the second sound that we chose is just far more prolonged. You guys can hear as long as I keep my finger held down on the key, it's going to continue to play. Whereas for the first instrument here, the length of the sound itself is just far more brief. So keeping this in mind, it's probably going to be a better idea to keep this melody a little bit more simple if we were to go with our second sound here, just because the sound itself is a little bit more dense, whereas if we go with our first sound, we have a little bit more room to be a little bit more complicated with our melody and add additional notes in or more layers in, just because the sound itself is a little bit less dense. So this is something really important to keep in mind. Just because the melody that you write adheres perfectly in terms of music theory doesn't mean it's going to result in a good beat in the end. There are a lot of other factors that go into making a good beat, so writing an amazing melody isn't going to save the beat if you do the other things in the beat making process incorrectly. So sound selection, choosing the right sound for your beat, and understanding that it's going to dictate a lot of what you should be doing with the other elements in your beat, including the melody that you write, is really important. But we don't have to choose just one sound for our entire melody. What might be a better approach is to split this amongst multiple instruments. For example, what if I chose that pluckier instrument that we looked at and I had it play these higher notes up here, and then I took that more dense sound that we looked at and I had it play the remaining notes, the ones down below right here. This might result in a better balance and we have a far more interesting beat because we have multiple textures in our beat now. And at this step, I can experiment with which instrument should be playing which notes. For example, let's say I go into the more dense sound here, and I don't want it to play as many notes, so I'll cut these over into the more pluckier sound. For this particular melody and these particular notes, I thought it would be a good idea to have the more dense instrument play less notes. And so this is something that I advocate for. Just splitting your melody across multiple instruments is just going to make your beat a little bit more interesting just because there's multiple textures in it now. And this is going to help you achieve a better balance overall because you can more easily control which frequencies you might want to cut out and how you want to color each of these sounds. So for example, with a more pluckier instrument here, I separated it out pretty wide in the stereo space. I also narrowed down the frequency bandwidth that this instrument's going to take up. And I added some pretty extreme tape saturation on top as well. Now looking at the more dense sound here, I also narrowed the frequency spectrum but a different space, so now it takes up its own space in the beat. And I also added some tape emulation onto this sound, albeit a far less aggressive style of tape saturation here. So now when I put them together, each of these textures are individual, they sound unique, and they also take up their own unique space in the beat. So as you can see, this technique allows for so much more control, and if I do this right, it's going to end up with a far more balanced beat in the end. Now one cool little trick that I want to show you guys, let's say you get to the point where you want to add an additional layer into the beat for a hook, for example, but you don't quite know how to do it just because your melody is already pretty dense and you don't know where to squeeze additional notes in. One thing that you could do is add an ARP into your beat. This is a great, easy way to add complexity into your beat without really having to do much. So what I can do is just open up a synth, and most synths are going to have an ARP section. And you can go and scroll through and choose a texture that sounds like it's going to fit with the textures that you already have in your beat. For those that don't know what an ARP is, what it's going to do is play a unique rhythm based off of the notes that I choose. So for example, let's say I chose a C sharp as well as an E. You guys can hear what's going to happen. Based on the notes that I choose, it's going to play a unique little pattern here. So I'm just going to copy and paste a bunch of these notes from my original melody here. And you can play around with which notes you want to copy and paste over, but nonetheless, this is what we get. So I can use this as an extra layer in my beat for a switch up or for a hook, whatever I see fit. And I can also go into the synth itself, go into the ARP section, and just play around with the pattern here as well to come up with something different. So I can choose an entirely different preset, for example, play around with the different patterns here. This is just a great and easy way to use the melody that you came up with to add more into your beat. Now let's say you get to the point where you want to make an adjustment to your melody. Let's say you get to the point where you have a switch up or you want to do something different, but you're not quite sure what to do. There are a few tools in FL Studio that can help you out in this situation. One simple tool is to flip your notes. So let's say, for example, I chose the top line of the melody up here. All you got to do is hit Alt and Y. This will give you a couple options to flip horizontally or vertically or both. So this is a nice little tool that will help you quickly experiment with some variations. And there's also Riff Machine, a tool that can be accessed by hitting Alt and E. This is something that you can use if you want to try out different ideas. And the way you'd use this is turn on Work on Existing Score down here. Turn off all of the other tabs except for ARP. And from here you'd play around with the different patterns as well as the time multiplicator knob. And you can get some pretty cool ideas using the notes that you already had to play a different type of melody. So this is a tool that I explained a little bit more deeply in the video right above my head. So if you're interested in learning how to use it, check that video out. If you guys have enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Let me know in the comment section below if you have little tips and tricks that you like to use whenever you come up with your melodies. My free drum kit is available in the description box below, as well as a link to the Discord if you're interested in having your beats reviewed live. And I will see you guys next time.